So I'm going to talk about overhead positioning, and I'm going to be able to play some audio examples of this. So what you see in this picture is sort of XY configuration, or Blum line, or Bloom line, or Bloom lean. I actually don't know how to pronounce the guy's name, but any of you guys know? No. He's like a German guy from England who developed this technique, and essentially his technique is essentially the same as XY, but using figure of 8 patterns. And I did not record a figure of 8 pattern from these mics in this position. I just did XY, which is two cardioid microphones that are essentially coincident over the top of the drum set. The mics that I used here are Sound Deluxe E49s, which are a large diaphragm tube condenser microphone. I don't usually use large diaphragm mics as overheads, but I do sometimes, and they're really classy sounding mics, so they're great, but certainly not the only option. The reason why I chose these for this audio example is that I wanted to use a microphone with switchable polar patterns so I could demonstrate the differences between different polar patterns over a kit. And as you'll see, there's no other microphones on the kit yet, so we just we did some audio examples. Let me see if I can find them somewhere here in my Pro Tools session. All right, can we switch over to Pro Tools now? All right, so take a listen to what XY sounds like, which is the position that you just saw in that photo. It's two cardioid condenser microphones, sort of several feet over the snare drum, right over the kit. So let's see what this sounds like. All right, that's enough of that. If you're, hopefully at home you're listening on decent speakers or on decent headphones. In here we don't really have the greatest playback system, so we're not going to really discern the differences between some of these tests. But hopefully at home you're listening on good speakers and you can tell. I'll come back to that, and we'll give you a little blast of each one again after we go through them all. I didn't adjust any polar patterns in this position. And can we switch back to Keynote? I'm going to move ahead to the space pair of overheads. And in this position, I set it up so that the microphone is, each microphone is equidistant to the snare drum. And then we're going to hear what each of 3 polar patterns sounds like in this position. So, am I missing one? Okay, so spaced pair cardioid sounds like this. All right, so we have a pretty decent stereo spread there and a reasonable amount of separation between the left and the right stuff, but there's still, quite a bit of bleed from the left side of the kit into the right mic and vice versa. If you want to cut down on that bleed between the 2 sides of the kit, you can switch those mics to figure 8. And that the intro demo to the drum sound thing talked about that a little bit, where you use the figure of 8 pattern, which sort of rejects along the plane between the 2 capsules to reject the left and right sides of the kit. So the left side of the kit is really capturing what's right below the microphone and rejecting what's on the other side of the kit. So let's hear what that sounds like. So, yeah, you can hear that the stereo image is quite a bit wider on the figure of 8 mics, and also the tone's a little thinner. Figure 8 mics just inherently have a thinner tone than a cardioid or an omni. And speaking of omni, let's hear what the same microphones in the same position sound like in omni mode. Now this is the least wide stereo image, has the most crosstalk from left and right, but is also the smoothest, and I think possibly the most flattering tone of the kit. Okay, so that's what that sounds like. Now I'm just going to quickly zip through each of these again, and you can see on the screen, on the Pro Tools screen, I've named each of these files, so you can kind of follow along. But I'm just going to skip through each one. The XY again is the two coincident mics, and then the other three are three different polar patterns of the spaced pair. Okay, so they're really quite a bit different from each other, and when you're setting up your overheads, you want to think about how wide, in the final mix, how wide of an image do you want from the drum set? Is this going to be a band that has like super hard pan guitars? And if that's the case, you might want a more narrow image from your drum set. So you might want to choose your mic positions and your mic polar patterns based on that. What I ended up deciding to do on this record was not to use these mics at all. And let's go back to the keynote for a second here. And we can actually just leave it on the keynote for a few minutes. I'll play something from Pro Tools, but I don't have to switch back. What I ended up using on this record was a technique called ORTF, which stands for, it's something French. Office de Radiodiffusion Télévision Français. So ORTF is what that stands for. You can just call it ORTF, that's what I do. It's two microphones, two cardioid microphones, positioned about ear width apart and at 110 degrees apart from each other. So I'm using one mic stand and a little stereo bar to put these two microphones, which are made by SE. They're called RN17s, which the RN stands for Rupert Neve, who's probably the most famous console designer in the world. He's not known for his microphones, but I think these mics are killer, and they're quite a bit thinner sounding than the mics you just heard. But I decided on this record, I wanted my overheads really mostly to capture some attack from the drums, but mostly they were just going to be cymbal mics. And I was going to get the body of my drum sound from my close mics. And I do think about that a lot as I'm not only choosing overhead microphone position and microphone choice, but also how I signal process the overheads, is if I'm going to be getting my primary drum sound from my overheads, or if I'm getting my primary drum sound from my close mics and then sort of backfilling with the overheads. I try not to get too much of the same type of sound from multiple sources. I feel as though there's fewer phase conflicts when you're capturing the bulk of a sound from a single source. More on that topic later. So let's just take a listen to my final overhead sound using these mics, and then there's also a bit of EQ. I used some Empirical Labs Lil Freaks, which are some very precise parametric EQs to sort of reduce the harshness of the cymbals, accentuate the sizzle from the cymbals, and remove some of the sub-bass stuff that'll conflict with the depth of the close mics. And I also removed some lower mid-range, and I feel like the low mids are really crucial in a mix, and also in tracking, in painting, in setting the sound stage. So stuff with more low mid-range will feel closer to you, and stuff with less low mid-range will feel further from you. So I was trying to set a little bit more of a, watching this band in a medium-sized rock club type sound stage. If I was trying to be like, if you're trying to be right in the band, I would have more low mid-range. If I'm trying to put them in a stadium, I might have even less low mid-range. So this is what my final overhead sound ended up being. enough of that. So that ended up working well, I think, with my close mics. So pretty much already gone through this. Let's talk. Oh, let's talk about room mics now. Yeah, room mics. I'm going to play a quick little video about room mics. What you just saw was, and we're going to hear audio examples of these, was 3 different room mic positions. So the first one was a spaced pair of Omni microphones, which are actually the same mics that I used on overheads for the overhead example. Spaced pair of Omni large diaphragm tube condensers in the room, maybe like 6 or 7 feet back from the kit, spread out. So I got a nice stereo image for that, and there's those mics are looking directly at the kit. The room that I record in is fairly neutral. It's not particularly ambient. It's not totally dead, but it's not particularly ambient. So let's go back to Pro Tools for a second and take a listen to what direct room mics sound like. Okay. And then, if you remember in the video, you saw the second thing that you saw in that quick little video was I have some walls on wheels that I rolled in front of the mic. So now that's going to give me a more diffused sound. So in order for the drum sound to get to the mics, it can't take a direct path to the mics. It's got to bounce around a little bit before it gets to the mics. So at first listen, it actually sounds less flattering because it's a less direct sound from the drum set, but as a component in a drum mix with close mics, it actually gets out of the way of the close mics more, and it's functioning more like a reverb. So now you have fewer phasing conflicts between your close mics, and you have more independent control of ambience versus tightness. So let's hear how the diffused microphones sound with the walls in front of them. All right, pretty cool. Now, the last thing you saw in that video was that same mic in my bathroom. And I also have, you didn't see in that video, I have another ISO booth that's sort of opposite my bathroom. So if you were the drummer sitting behind the drum set, as you look out into my live room, in the back left corner, there's a doorway to my bathroom, and in the back right corner, there's a doorway to an ISO booth. And my ISO booth is small but ambient. There's all reflective surfaces in there aside from the amps I'm storing in there. And same thing with my bathroom. It's aside from being amp storage, it's pretty reflective. So I'll actually put microphones back there around the corner, sort of totally out of sight of the drum set. And those mics are fully diffused. They're really getting only like second and third order reflections in there. So not only are they getting only reflected sound, but their distance from the kit is a little bit further. Now you can fake that distance by adding a little bit of pre-delay to your own room mics if you're recording in a smaller space. But I think that my mics, that distance is pretty good. It's enough that I get the feeling of spread from, like, you know, it goes like close mic, overhead, room mics, and it spreads out over time. And too much delay, you start to feel a flam, but I think I have just enough delay naturally in my room to get that to sound cool. So this one, you know, it's even mushier than the last example, but works even better in talking to the close mics and staying out of the way of the close mics. So let's check that out. All right, so again, just quickly, the direct room mics. And the diffused room mics. And the really That's the really diffused room mics. I did a little bit more processing to that when we did the final setup. I think I moved those walls around in my room and sort of made it a wider stereo image of those things, did a little bit more EQing to them, and a little bit of compression to kind of squash the attack of the room mics and bring out the resonance of those rooms. And compression can do a lot to increase the perceived size of the room. So let's hear that. Cool. All right, I want to just quickly play what the whole drum set sounds like. These are just raw level set tracks with a in the box mix of my just the raw tracks for mixing. All right, let's just remove my ambient. Oh, I also have this other track called Close Room. That was just like a mono close room mic that I ended up using. I don't need to talk about that too much. But I just want to remove my ambient mic so you can hear what that sounds like, and then I'll bring in the big room mic so you can see how that affects the sound. So we have the punch of the close mics, but we also have the size of the big room. So it gives you the impression that you're there in the room with the kit, but it also gives you control of the close mic so that you can rip through a mix.
You actually have a little bit of time for questions if you want to start off.
Sure. So you were talking about blowing up your Royers, and 7 steps are used. Says those are stated to handle high SPL as a certain volume, acceptable or unacceptable for those mics, blah, blah, blah. Can you talk a little bit? You've mentioned blowing up mics more than anybody I've ever ever listened to. It sounds like that's something that happens to you fairly often. Can you talk about that a little bit and how to avoid it?
You have to be careful, for sure. The Royer website, they actually have some recommendations on how to mic a bass drum with a Royer 121, and it's not an uncommon problem. And they're actually quite good about servicing their own microphones.
Those are not cheap microphones.
They're not cheap. I think that they might do like the first replacement for free and then charge you. Don't quote me on that. But you do have to be careful, and there's some loud stuff. Bass drums move a lot of air. I'm sure everyone's at some point stood in front of a bass drum and just felt wind coming at them. A Royer can handle like a super loud guitar amp and being jammed right into the speaker of a super loud guitar amp. But like, if you put your mouth on it and go like, you can break the ribbon. And that's essentially like what a bass drum is doing to that ribbon element. So you gotta be careful, especially with ribbon mics. I don't break mics all the time, but it definitely happens.
Beautiful. All right, we've got one more here that I wanted to get to from Stefanos Phoenix. Have you ever considered or used more of a simplistic mic setup, or are you a diehard fan of isolated drum sounds?
Most of the records that I'm working on aesthetically, they're looking for isolated kind of drum sounds, like heavy close mic stuff. My approach to that very much depends on what the guitar sound is going to be. If I know it's going to be a wall of guitars, then the close mics I think are going to be necessary to cut through the wall of guitars. In terms of what is the most ear-pleasing to me, if a band is using a more if there's more space in their guitar tone, I love using or relying mostly on ambient microphones, whether it be overheads, close room mics, distant room mics, to get most of the drum sound. There's also, much talked about on the internet, there's assorted minimal miking techniques, the Glyn Johns thing and Recorder Man or whatever. And that stuff is great. It's fun to experiment with. And when I do that stuff, unless I'm really committed to doing it, I'll also set up some close mics as a backup. And I'm going to talk in the mixing portion a little bit more about this, but if you can do like the close miking sounding things and have your primary drum set come from the ambient mics and just use the close mics to backfill it, and in those cases, you might actually want to rely heavily on subtly sliding your tracks digitally so that they line up with the ambient mics that you're going to be choosing. So you can sneak those close mics in less noticed than a conventional method. So it's kind of strange to think about doing a lot more technical engineering work to make something sound more minimal. But in reality, like it's an interesting technique that lets you get away with using more sort of a minimal tone, but having a little bit extra control over it.